Remember this guy? It's okay if you don't. Way back in 2016, we made a $120 Esports PC, and this was the result. A Q6600 machine with 4GB of DDR3 and a V5800 for graphics. It was a good little PC for the price back then, but now it's really starting to show its age. New esports and games in general are really starting to struggle on it, so is it worth upgrading and refreshing it, or is it time to get a new PC? This question actually matters to me, as I do use this as my secondary PC for when I have friends over so we can play a game or two together. So, is it worth the investment, or should this old elder finally be put into retirement? So, what's on the docket to get upgraded? The first thing that we will be doing is installing an SSD for a quality of life upgrade. Likely the in-game performance won't be affected by it with the exception of load times, but any sane gamer wouldn't be caught dead without one nowadays, so we're going to be installing this. This is a very cheap $20 120GB SSD for the OS, nothing too special here. As for the GPU, we will be upgrading to the GTX 1050. I picked this bad boy up for $50 a couple of months ago before the GPU prices went absolutely bonkers, so I guess I lucked out there. As for why we chose the GTX 1050, well, the CPU in the PC is quite old, so it's unlikely that if we chose anything more powerful, that it would be able to take advantage of it. Also, we did have to be sure to choose a GPU that didn't require any 6-pin power connector and was only a single slot on the I/O due to the PC's BTX form factor. And this GPU fit the bill perfectly. The GTX 1050 is quite the step up from the FirePro V5800 that is currently in there. With 640 Pascal cores at a 1500 MHz boost clock, this GPU has a core that is, on paper, over 4 times as fast as the old V5800. Also, it comes equipped with 2GB of GDDR5 with a bus width of 128 bits, giving it a memory bandwidth of 112GB per second. That is almost double the bandwidth of the FirePros, so in theory we should see a large uplift in performance, if nothing else is causing issues. I desperately wanted to upgrade the RAM for this to 8GB, but unfortunately due to this OEM motherboard's very limited DDR3 compatibility, I couldn't find any 2GB RAM modules that would actually post with it. So unfortunately we were stuck with 4GB, and I think that's all we're ever going to get. And as far as testing goes, we kept the testing short and sweet. We tested Fortnite at 1080p low settings, Valorant at 1080p high settings, Overwatch at 1080p low settings, and Rise of the Tomb Raider at 720p low settings. In Fortnite, this PC struggled to run the game well with the V5800. With only a 25 FPS average, it's far from competitive. The low frame rate of 5 FPS is definitely attributed to frame spikes caused by the assets loading in. During these moments, the GPU usage would drop and the CPU usage would spike, indicating a clear and present bottleneck caused by the CPU. This held true as well for the much more powerful GTX 1050. Despite having a core that is 4 times more powerful, we still didn't manage to break the 60 FPS average mark. In theory, this GPU should easily be able to do that, but again, due to the CPU bottlenecks, the GPU usage sat below 50% most of the time, not allowing it to reach its full potential. Even with the GTX 1050, there were still frame time spikes caused by the CPU, which would certainly make playing a competitive multiplayer shooter a bit aggravating. In Overwatch, we only saw a slight uptick in performance with the GTX 1050. Although the game was still playable, the GPU usage sat at a dismal 30% on average, with it rarely ever breaking 50. We did see frame time spikes in this game. Changing the settings doesn't really affect it. Even at 1080p high settings, the frame rate and frame times are similar to what they were at lower settings. This poor GPU is really held back on this PC. But before we make our ultimate judgment, we have one more game to test. Rise of the Tomb Raider was tested at 720p low settings. Although not an esport, it's a good representation of how an average graphically demanding game would perform. And it didn't perform that well. Even with the GTX 1050, we didn't see an average of 60 FPS. And at times, the game got actually physically memory limited, dropping the frame rate to a jarring 1 FPS. And per usual, the GTX 1050 didn't see that large of an uplift in performance over the V5800, largely due to the CPU bottleneck. As much as I love this PC, and although it'll always hold a special place in my heart, I think it's finally time to retire it. This old guy helped kickstart my channel, and for nearly 5 years of dedicated service, it rarely let me down. Although it certainly is time to replace it with a more capable PC, I can't just sell it or give it to some e-recycler, because once a member of the Socket Sanctuary family, always a member of the Socket Sanctuary family. I think we can find a use for it somewhere.